Welcome to part two of my interview with Francisco. Oh shit! I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say your name right. I'm Francisco Moreo Correa.
Okay,
Not
it's
really good.
similar, yes.
Not really good. You're of all the friends in ufology I have. Your name is the one I butcher the most. I it's the worst job that I do.
It's nasal. You have to pronounce it with a nasal
So can you
vowel.
tell folks here how you pronounce your name, please?
My whole name,
Yeah, say
or
it.
just
I have it here, but
Francisco, Francisco Bernardo Magalhães Mourão Correia.
thank you, sir. All of this is being recorded for the members of the. They can hear me say shit here. That's fine. I don't care. We had a really interesting interview, and we talked mostly about Portuguese military cases pertaining to UFOs. I really liked our chat at the very end, where we were talking a little bit about the UFO culture, exopolitics culture, and how you feel. I think we completely agree here. How it's been damaged by the kind of infestation of unproven and wild speculative claims that are almost cult-like in nature. One of the things that I noticed, so I was visiting with you in Portugal a few years ago. I think it might have been 2014. I think that sounds right.
I guess.
Yeah, and it was a lot of
Yeah.
fun. You really introduced me to some great port wine. Loved that. Just the whole experience was fantastic. Wonderful people. But one thing that struck me was I mean, it shouldn't be surprising, but the very deep research that was done on Fatima by a lot of Portuguese researchers. And the other thing that struck me was that there seemed to be a fair amount of information about that case to this day that hasn't really gotten out to has not gotten out to English speaking researchers. And as far as I can tell, there's some unique information that still may be in the archives.
There were some books that were translated to English. Celestial Secrets, Heavenly Lights. It's three books that were translated, and the editor of the books, for my biggest surprise, was Andrew Basiago.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Anyway, but the fact is the books are maybe too academic in terms of language.
Yeah.
So maybe for the general public, it would not be easy to read. Too much facts eventually.
Right.
The pioneer research was done by Joaquim Fernandes and Fina de Armada. Joaquim Fernandes had the first idea that maybe what had happened in Fatima in 1917 could relate more to UFOs than to the divine. And he knew Fina de Armada, who's a historian as well, a good researcher, and he tried to drag her to the research. Thing is, several details. Fina de Armada tried to apply to a scholarship, and that scholarship was she wanted to study the role of women during the First Republic. As you know, Portugal was founded in 1143 and stayed as a monarchy until 1910.
Yeah.
In 1910, there was a coup, there was the assassination of the king, and the republic was instituted. So she wanted to know the role of women in the First Republic. And there was this woman, Maria Correa, who was the first to gather money to build the first chapel in Fatima. So she wanted to know more about her. She got excuse to ask for access to the sanctuary, so to the files of the sanctuary. And she was allowed. She was given the scholarship. She was allowed to go there to the Fatima sanctuary to see the files. She always had someone next to her. She could not record anything. She only could take notes. And she could not see everything because there were too many files. Anyway, she was lucky. She found several things that were astounding, and then eventually, when she tried to publish the results, the scholarship ended, and whole her academic perspective was damaged for the future.
And I know you informed me, unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years
She
ago.
passed away in 2014,
Yeah.
in April 2014, and it was like almost a disgrace because we just had done. It was the second season of the series for the History Channel, Extraterrestres, and one of the episodes was supposed to be only about Fatima.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, well, we did. We went to her place. We filmed there for a full day. In the end, with the episode ready to be aired, I got a message. The episode was going to air on a Sunday. On Friday, I got a message that it was censored. There was no episode to be shown because someone inside the board of directors of the History Channel said they couldn't have the responsibility of hurting the religious feelings of the public.
Can you give a nice overview of the Fatima event? Not every listener, particularly I must say, like in the English-speaking world, really knows the details that well. In Portugal, I know it's extremely well known. In much of the world, it is. But I think there's a lot of folks who really don't. And could you just give a nice overview of it, please?
Okay, there are too many details.
First, World War I was going on.
Or the story that was accepted is that in 1917, on May 13th of May 1917, these three shepherds, Lucia, she was 10, Francisco, he was 9, and Jacinta was 7. They saw the Virgin Mary that showed to them, and it showed again for several months until October, where it was performed a miracle and the sun danced above the heads of almost 70,000 people.
They saw the Virgin Mary who appeared to them. They actually talked about this, and they received attention way back in the spring of 1917. And the oldest girl, Lucia, I think said that she was told by this apparition that there would be an event on October 13th, 1917. And there were several apparitions in between as well, I believe.
Yes.
So
yes.
And there were a lot of skeptics, of course, at the time, and because Portugal was a new republic, there was also suspicion that this was an anti-republican, very, very religious sort of a thing. I mean, I read that once. I don't know if that's...
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
You have to understand that in that place, that particular place, which was not called Fatima, it was called Covert. Back then, it was very rural area. Uneducated people that didn't know how to read or write. Mm-hmm. There were no roads, there was no radio, there was no electricity. Okay, so people just go out with their sheep, and
so no ulterior motives. This is just these young people have these apparitions.
The word of mouth would spread very, with small pace.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. But it built up though. The tension built up throughout 1917.
The tension built up, yes. Because the Virgin Mary was showing up, so eventually every month there was more and more people trying to see the Virgin Mary, until it culminated on the 13th of October with almost 70,000 people. I have to say that last year we had L.A. Marzulli, you know him? He came to Portugal to film a documentary about Fatima. He spent almost 2 weeks here. I showed him every researcher, every place, and he did a very good documentary. He thinks his interpretation that this was demonic in origin, which rather struck me with the fear of people from the Pentagon that maybe the Skinwalker Ranch was demonic as well. So there's maybe some parallel here, because there are believers that say that there's some kind of portal also in the area of Fatima.
Really?
Yeah. So Fina and Joaquim Fernandes made the research. They eventually not only gathered information from the sanctuary, but also from the National Archives. It was a very thorough investigation.
Well, can you describe what happened on the 13th?
Yes.
Okay.
So back in 1915, 1916, prior to 1917, there were reports of strange lights and strange phenomena in that area. On February 7th, 1917, a group of psychics, they were performing one of their sessions, and eventually they got a message which they transcribed to a paper, and this was automatic writing from right to left. And this message said that something extraordinary was about to happen. They felt that information was so important that they registered it on the logs of the sessions, which was not something common. Later, on March 10th, just 1 month after, they decided to publish it on a newspaper.
Okay.
And Fina da Armada was able to contact some of the living people from that group and asked them if it was usual for them to publish their messages. And they said no, they just felt compelled to publish this news.
So they published it in what, in a newspaper?
On this newspaper, there's a small thing saying 135917. It was like a little bit cryptic, the information regarding that something extraordinary will happen. And 135917, it's 13th of May, 1917. 135917.
Yes, right.
Okay? In May 10th, May 11th, there was another. This was published on newspapers in Lisbon. On May 10th, a guy also paid for his own pocket for publishing on 3 newspapers in Porto, and these were big newspapers. That's something that he had received also some kind of message, and something extraordinary will happen on 13th of May 1917. So this is like 2-3 days prior to the event. He published by his own pocket. He was published on the front page of the most read newspaper in Portugal, and this guy didn't know about the guys in Lisbon.
Okay. Wow.
So even on the 13th of May, again they republished that. Be attention that something extraordinary will marvel the entire world, and the journalist that wrote this news was a very known journalist.
On what basis was he making this claim? Does anybody know? Like, why did he come to this conclusion?
He believed that probably it had something to do with the war, World War I.
But this is like a psychic prediction, that type of a thing? Is that what this was? It sounds like it.
Or something just was communicated.
Right, okay.
Okay. I don't know. So eventually the interpretation from these people was that it was related to World War I.
Yeah.
And people were expecting some kind of armistice or ending of the war. So 13th of May, by noon, these 3 shepherds on an isolated area, rural area, no roads, no radio, no electricity, They just heard a buzzing sound, and they saw. I have to say that Lucia never speaks about Virgin Mary. Her testimony to the local priests only talks about a small being holding a ball of light, a small being like 1 meter 20 maybe. She compared it with her cousin, a small lady. It had a feminine resemblance, and her description does not match any known Christian figure. It was almost like an astronaut with a strange suit. Okay? And this being would talk without moving its lips. And Francisco, the 9-year-old cousin of Lucia, wouldn't hear her talk, just saw the being.
Okay.
And what startled most was the fact that all the sheep were paralyzed. When the being
sheep
showed up,
the sheep in the field were paralyzed.
They were on the same position. They were not eating. That was what, from the written records from 1917, it was what is expressed, that Francisco was astonished by the fact that the sheep were paralyzed.
Is it just me? Am I the only one who didn't know this, or is this just a little known fact about the case?
No, it's not known. Eventually, if you see the documentary from Ale Marzulli, I talked about this as well.
Okay.
But yes, it's on the books, but it's less known. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Most of the facts are less known. Eventually, the being asked for Lucia to learn how to read, and you have to. Our interpretation is that the faculty of reading is the basis of knowledge. Is getting information, right? So he asked them to come every 13th of the month, and on the 6th time, it would show them some sort of miracle, or it would tell them who it was and what it came for.
Okay.
So they went to the house. They spoke about their vision. Eventually, their mother, the mother of Lucia and the mother of the other two, they were very religious. There was no television, no radio, so they basically
the Virgin Mary.
They were very devoted, and it was one of the uncles of Jacinta that said, "If it comes from the heaven, it has to be the Virgin Mary."
Yeah. Okay. That's how this
eventually,
started.
On July, there were already a few people there waiting to see the miracle or the being. In August, there was no. The shepherds were taken by the local priest for a hideout in order to the operation to not show up, because in the beginning the church didn't believe them. They said it was made of.
Yeah.
Even the patriarch bishop later in the 50s said it was not the church that made Fatima, it was the people. The people pressed because they believed it was the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
And so on the 13th of August, there was the shepherds weren't there. There were people there waiting to see the sign, and people that were there witnessed something, because usually only the shepherds would see the being. The other people would not see the being, but they would see luminous globes. They would see flying hats.
Are you talking about on October 13th? October 13th?
No.
Oh, even before.
The other months. during the other months. So there were physical evidence that something was happening there.
I see.
Only the shepherds would see the being, but all the people around would see some things that some witnesses said we could not explain what we are seeing, like these flying hats, flying globes, oval-shaped objects that would move without the incidence of the wind. Okay?
Right.
And eventually, more things that I cannot say. So this, and in August, the shepherds were released eventually, and on the 19th, the being showed up on them as well. And there's a difference from the reports before August and after August, in the sense that maybe the being that may have shown up on the 13th and not seen the shepherds later had different approaches in order to certify that the shepherds were there. A little bit complicated to explain, but from the witnesses' reports, there were more phenomena happening after August than there were before August.
Okay, so it was putting on more of a display as the summer went on.
Display, exactly. Even in September, there were medical doctors explaining this. They would see like the means of transport of the lady. They could not see the being, but they, for example, Jacinta describes the being coming from a stair of light.
Okay.
So this was projected.
Like a roadway or something coming down.
Exactly.
Perhaps, who knows?
And witnesses from afar say that the shepherds were involved in this light as well. The bush or the small tree where the being would stand would have effects like the leaves were bent, and there was like physical evidence that something had been staying there. Okay. Jacinta eventually describes like the lady going up, and there were doors in the cloud that would close, almost hitting its feet.
Where are these accounts coming from? Because this is again not widely known. I don't think
the official records that were written in 1917 by the local priests.
I see.
And from the official inquiries from 1923 that was stored at the sanctuary.
It's really just a fascinating amount of detail.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
So on October, people were expecting a miracle.
Yeah.
And it had been raining all night, raining all morning, crowded place. Some cars there, more wealthy people that came by car, but very few cars. Eventually, suddenly they saw something that some people interpreted as being the sun dancing in front of them.
Yes, exactly.
But several different testimonies, including medical doctors and other well-known people, they describe a disc-shaped object, metallic disc-shaped object with several lights, cascade of lights that would spin. Some people reported seeing like translucent figures from behind the disc. They interpreted
so
as
these
being
are some of the descriptions. They actually had descriptions that describe like basically a craft.
Exactly. This object came from behind the clouds, and it made a move like a flyby over the people's heads. And where it flew by, there was the feeling of heat there were the buzzing sounds, and the people's clothes were dried, the land was dried.
Yeah.
There's reports of sudden combustion of gasoline, windshields that shattered, hoods of the cars that were opened. Like people were terrified, not understanding what they were seeing.
I just want to say, if someone, I don't know if you've looked at the English language Wikipedia version of the Fatima event. And I mean, everything that Wikipedia does on this subject is bad. Like, Wikipedia does uniformly bad work, in my opinion, on anything to do with UFOs or the fringe.
It's a database, so eventually you can add your own story almost, right?
Well, Wikipedia is very highly manicured, very, very edited, in my opinion, and skeptics have just dominated Wikipedia for a long time. So under the Fatima event, none of those details that you've described appear in that entry. None. And all of the testimony is organized to make it seem like the sun in the sky was seen dancing around the sky, which of course everyone knows. The sun did not really dance in the sky.
Everybody on the planet would have seen it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mention all the consequences for the entire solar system if the sun would move.
Absolutely. So clearly that did not happen. No. And yet the Wikipedia entry is really dishonest, in my opinion, the way that they portray this event.
Yeah.
Just what I'm saying.
And eventually there are witnesses on a 20-mile range in different areas that all see this object coming from the sky and staying there and moving. So there's corroboration from other areas. And so where the object flew by, people were dried, people were outside this area still wet. Fina Darmada was able to pinpoint some of the witnesses through the records from the National Archives. And all the team made a map where they pinpoint all the people where they stood, and they were able to interview some of them as well. Okay, so living witnesses of the events. Eventually, Father Ferreira.
They were interviewed like many years later. Is that
years?
Yes.
In the 70s. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the major research was made in the 70s.
I see.
Eventually the local priests that had been recording all the testimony from mainly from Lucia, I think it was in November of 1917, he said he couldn't handle the story, the way it was being presented by the people, not by the church, but by the people, and he just vanished. In total disagreement with the way it was being conducted. So the church only took control of it from beginning 1920s, 1923 were the official inquiries. In 1936, it was published the Lucia Memories, where it was added the first secret, then in 41 a second secret, and in 44 a third secret. Because Lucia never talks about secrets in her original testimony. Okay?
Yeah, this is the one thing I remember. The one fact that I learned when I was in Portugal is that Lucia, who was really the main witness, because the other two boys died early, didn't they?
They died with the pneumonic disease. Very much, almost after 1 or 2 years later, they died. And
but Lucia she lived a long life.
Lucia was sent to a monastery Jesuit monastery in Spain, where she was made a vow of silence, and she eventually came to the sanctuary, but she was not available to talk to people, only with the special permission.
So what does it seem like? It seems like the Catholic Church took complete control over the narrative of what happened and turned it into this apparition of the Virgin Mary. But really what you're saying, I believe, is the historical analysis doesn't show
and
anything like that.
I can make a disclaimer here. I'm Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised in a very conservative Catholic family from both sides. I raised my two kids as Catholics as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to go to Fatima, and I feel there's a special energy there, and at least the message in terms of peace and love, etc. It's well presented there. Okay, so
Yeah.
At the very least, it's a good thing. But I personally don't believe it was a Virgin Mary. Even the Pope Benedict was saying it was not an apparition; it was more sort of a vision, and he was very critical of all the Fatima case as well. So yeah, another thing that few people know about it is that Fina also discovered a fourth witness, and the fourth witness it's another girl. She was the daughter of Maria Correa, the one that collected money to build the first chapel.
All right.
And she was handling the ship from a man, a wealthy man. He and another girl. And one day they spotted a strange figure in the fields. There was a small wall of stones, and beyond that wall she described it as a small child, blonde small child, that she could not understand if it was male or female.
Interesting.
And eventually she spotted it, and it was like laughing and singing at the same time.
And this is in 1917, but not with the other three children.
Exactly, on another place, on a totally different place, and she was taking care of the sheep. She was afraid of the sheep because this man had a very bad temper, and she eventually noticed that the sheep were paralyzed as well.
That's
and so
fascinating.
She looked at the being again, and the being was on top of a bush already and asking her, come and pray, come and pray. And she was afraid of the sheep. She was staring at the sheep being almost paralyzed, and eventually she ran away, and she told her mother much later. And Fina was able to talk to her in the 70s. She was a very old lady back then, and
yes.
she talked to her.
Yes.
And she eventually she never told anyone else besides her mother and some aunts, and eventually they thought she was a little bit lunatic, etc. But yeah, it's interesting, and that's why also the Marzulli thinks that this could well be demonic in some way. I don't know. It's an interpretation.
I don't know. I wouldn't want to really comment on it. It seems more like I wouldn't say demonic. That's not where I would go to automatically. I suppose that would not be my.
The interesting thing is that there were other apparitions in different areas of Portugal, as there were also many other apparitions across the globe. You have Lourdes, you have in France, you have Guadeloupe, you have
sightings of the Virgin Mary are almost universal throughout European history.
And in Portugal, there are small sanctuaries, not as big as Fatima. Fatima is very, very big. But I went there with Marzulli in Ponte da Barca, in north of Portugal, south of Portugal. And very similar descriptions, not with the impact of Dancing Sun, but with a similar narrative of some being with a feminine attitude, trying to contact always with children.
Yeah, it's
white
an
children.
interesting phenomenon. There's a number of earlier stories. I've just recently been rereading some of them of encounters that people have had throughout European history, um, everywhere in Poland, in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, and everywhere else, where often you would have a peasant or maybe more than one peasant, and they would have this vision, or what we might even describe as a UFO sighting that would be in some area, and then they would go there. They would go to the area and encounter what they or the witness would say would be an apparition of the Virgin Mary, who would tell them, "I need you to build a church on this location." And they would
Exactly.
say, "But I'm just an illiterate peasant. No one will believe me." And the apparition says, "I don't care. This is your mission." And then they would do it. And there are churches in Europe that have like a monument to whatever peasant in the 15th century or 16th century who had this vision.
Always in high places, because the high places are more close to the sky or to heaven
Yeah.
eventually.
So whatever that is, who knows what that is?
One other detail,
Yeah.
um, interesting, photographer. There was a photographer, at least one,
Mm-hmm.
present on October 13th. It was Boloniel. He was a Jesuit photographer. He used to do works for the royal family, for example, when they were on vacation or something
Okay.
like that. He was a very well-known photographer.
I see.
And eventually you have to understand that back then, these photograph machines were very complicated. You have to wait for a certain amount of time, several minutes sometimes, in order to be at the right exposure, in order to take the photograph. So in lots of minutes, lots of things can happen. So,
Right.
but we have one colleague, José Machado, from the University of Trás-os-Montes, up north of Portugal. One time he was doing work with a colleague from the University of Coimbra, and they eventually got to the sanctuary to see glass plates from the beginning of the century. And they asked if there were any glass plates from 1917.
Oh, right.
And the guy that was there didn't know anything. They went around, and after a few hours, they discovered a different set in terms of size of glass plates that would not resemble any of the other ones. And they were there, these glass plates from the 13th October 1917.
Really?
From Joshua Boloniel, yes.
Wow.
José Machado wrote something about it, and he managed to take pictures of the glass plates and analyze them. And there are some interesting stuff there. You can argue about the authenticity or what you are seeing. But
are these published anywhere?
You can find, there are 3-4 of them that were not published.
Okay.
And he cannot release them.
All right.
Because he took them without permission.
So go on.
But we saw them. I have some copies of them. I can show it maybe in July, if I come to Copenhagen, I'll show it them.
Please, yes.
And you can see effects of light, and you can see effects of burning the glass plates. So some amount of energy was present there in order to damage the glass plates. Okay.
Interesting.
So there's some physical evidence there.
Yeah.
Eventually, there's one of them that shows a globe. It's some sort of, this like smog coming out of it. It's debatable, but it could be a smoking gun. It could be.
I hope that at some point these pictures can be shown in some way that allows us to study them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I don't know how much more time you have, Francisco. I mean, I know it's getting late where you are, and You've been very
8
generous
p.m.
with your
Yes,
time, yes.
yes.
So,
Okay, we can have more 15 minutes. It's okay.
all right. Well, good. I'll keep you. So, can I ask you then? The last thing that I really wanted to know is what is the deal with the Fatima prophecies? Is that a real thing, or is that something that the church invented? And what are the prophecies? I've really never understood this very well. Is this anything important, or is it not relevant to anything?
I don't believe there were any at all.
Have you
Because
heard what I'm talking
Lucian,
about? This isn't new to you. I mean, I keep hearing about Fatima
yes,
prophecies.
but the prophecies are based on the secrets, right?
Yeah. So what are
And
these?
eventually, what we seen from the original records from 1917 is that there was no mention at all to secrets.
Exactly.
So
So
there's no prophecy.
where did this all start then? Who started this talk about secrets and prophecies and
We have the feeling that maybe when Lucia was sent to the monastery, she was educated in that way, that she was like a special person and she had to deliver some kind of message. And the memories that she writes or publishes in 1931, it's I mean, we feel that it was written by someone else, almost, okay? Because he's an illiterate person that goes to the monastery and then shows almost a literacy that, I don't know, it's strange. And it's not impossible, but it's strange. And I told you, first there was one secret, then two secrets, and then eventually three secrets. And there's some people that already speak about the fourth secret. I personally don't believe there were any.
yeah. See, that's really interesting to me. Because you realize what we're talking about here. I don't know if this is the thing in Portugal, probably not, but it's like a Fatima cover-up. Seriously. You think about what happened. If they saw, let's say they saw what we would call a UFO or extraterrestrial type of event, which is it surely seems possible. Then, from my perspective, you have the church coming in eventually, anyway, and taking complete control over the story. They take Lucia herself physically and put her off in a monastery where she's not even allowed to talk. A vow of silence. The memoirs that you say that she wrote in 1931, and I'm sure you're not the only one who believes that she didn't write it. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the Catholic Church coming in and completely rewriting the story.
That, prior to the Institute of the Republic, there was a liberal left movement that was intellectual movement, mainly driven by lots of masonry, and eventually with the implementation of the Republic, the church lost a lot of power, because with royal family there was also the church going side by side. With the implementation of the Republic, the church lost power.
Yeah.
So Fatima was a way also to regain that power and to regain the focus.
Exactly.
We have a 90% population that is Catholic. Well, eventually, the final, the result, or I see it as when I go there, and I've been there many times, I feel good there. There's a good vibration there. There's a good energy there. And eventually, the message to pray for peace, etc., it makes sense. At least that. So maybe, I mean, the cover up was meant for some kind of good mean, maybe. Eventually.
I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying that I don't, after learning a little bit about this and hearing you talk about it, it seems to me that the Catholic Church simply just changed the event to suit their particular purpose.
But they are changing the narrative as well. When Benedict started saying that it was not an apparition. It was a vision, a subjective vision,
Right.
that was inside the shepherds. And there are a lot of priests that have a critic overview of the Fatima phenomenon as well.
Okay.
Not only, but because of all the market of merchandise that's around the sanctuary that moves millions and millions, that has nothing to do with the message. But the exploitation. I mean, Lucia was condemned for a terrible life.
Yeah.
Terrible life.
They did. They basically made her a prisoner.
Yeah.
Like, did they force her to become a nun? And it sounds like she was this young child who probably had no control over her situation. She's grabbed and put into a monastery where she's not allowed to speak ever.
In 1920, there was this man. I forgot his name. Anyway, he built an image, like a small statue of the Virgin Mary, that he offered to the sanctuary. Sanctuary. Well, back then it was just a small chapel.
Mm-hmm.
But it was to represent, according to him, the Virgin Mary. When Lucia saw it, she said, "This does not resemble what I see in any way." And in there's religious art, a book of religious art, where it's mentioned that figure was based on another figure of the Senhora de Lapa, which is a lady of another locality, something like that. So it was taken as the real Virgin Mary, but Lucia, when she saw it, said, "It has nothing to do with what I saw."
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting.
So, yeah.
Look, so other than the volumes edited by Andrew Basiago, which just is mind blowing, are there any other good sources in English? Maybe is that the best source on the Fatima information? Are there other, like, if someone really wants to read a good English language book?
If you want to see any, you can contact L.A. Marzulli. He did a good documentary. He has his own interpretations there, but he has all this information is there. I'm there. Joaquim Fernandes, Raul Brengel.
So this is a documentary. Is it completed, or is he still working?
Oh yes, it was released. I guess September last year.
All right. So L.A. Marzulli did a good documentary on Fatima. That's good.
Unfortunately, he's going through a bad time.
He lost his house in the fires.
In the fires in Malibu. Yeah. He lost everything, including his work. I don't know how much.
It's terrible.
Of his collection of DVDs he still has, but he has been promoting at least this research that I presented to him with Joaquim Fernandes and Raul Brengel and lots of other people. And he's been doing, when he goes to conferences, he's been presenting these results. But in terms of factual books, no. Besides these that were released, no. At least in Portuguese, yes. In English, no.
It's a shame.
Fina wrote 4 or 5 books about it.
Yeah,
in Portuguese.
It's such an interesting case, and to me, just from the little that I've learned from you and some of the folks in Portugal, the basic story that we have on Fatima is just, to me, seems wrong. It seems totally wrong. Both the official version and, the skeptical version, they're both totally wrong. And the genuine research that serious Portuguese researchers have done is unknown in the English-speaking world and much of the rest of the world. And I think that's such a shame. But if L.A. Marzulli's got a good documentary on it, maybe I can take a look and check that out.
Basically, what I've told you, more or less, it's represented in the documentary, more or less, with some animations, digital animations, etc. But basically more or less like that.
Well, he's got a very a biblical take on a lot of the mysteries, and I guess I would take issue with that. I have friends who have that approach. They're very, very good people, and some of them are very insightful. I just don't happen to agree with their fundamental interpretation of things, and so the whole demonic aspect of it just doesn't really seem persuasive to me. But if there's good information in there, it's worth looking at. So,
yeah.
There needs to be more. There needs to be like a really good book that deals with this.
One thing that I forgot to mention, the message that was received by the psychics was signed Stella Matutina. Stella Matutina.
Stella, stars.
Morning Star.
Oh. And this was from 1917.
Yes. In February, the psychics, the message was signed, the author of the message was signed Stella Matutina.
Wow. All right.
Morning.
It gets more and more interesting. All right. Well,
it's a complex case.
We're going to have to wrap this up. I mean, I know you've got things to do, but in fact, I've got to be out here. I've got to leave in a few minutes myself. So I'm really glad that we were able to do this. I've missed talking with you. This is so much fun. And we'll be please be in Copenhagen.
We can meet in Copenhagen in July.
We will be there.
Yeah.
So hopefully you'll get there as well. And Tracy will be with me, and Chris Aubeck will be speaking there as well. And I'm really looking forward to meeting him. I hope to chat with him before that happens. But I've just gone through some of his work recently, and he co-authored Wonders in the Sky with Jacques Vallée, of course, and that's a very, very fine book.
He participated. He was one of the participants of our series in the History Channel, in the segment of OPARTS, the out of place artifacts.
Oh, I see. Oh yeah, okay.
But the way they put him, I guess they eventually the editing part was he didn't show exactly what he wanted to say. So he was a little bit frustrated from what I learned, a little bit angry about the final results.
Well, it's typical of TV, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I have had so many nasty things with final editing. I mean, people that I invite to show, and then finally they don't show up in the screening. Names distorted. I mean,
no, it's. I used to get angry about it, and I've given up. Like my attitude now, honestly, if I see myself on a History Channel or some other documentary, and they get a couple of things right, I think wonderful. That's great. That's all I expect anymore. I don't I expect them to get so much either wrong or simplified and this type of thing. I just can't expect any more out of them. Most of those producers, I do feel, try hard. They try their best, but they're generally not knowledgeable, and they're
The problem is that the production team doesn't, communicate with the editing team. So there's lack of communication and lack of information.
So. Yeah.
Basically, that's what I understood.
And they are absolutely under very strong pressure to jazz up, even to just dramatize things and bring out things, because they're trying to get more and more eyeballs on their show. That's all it's about, just getting as many viewers as possible.
Yeah,
that's the way it goes. That's the name of it. Well, Francisco, I really want to thank you for hanging out with me for this time and talk.
Thank you for having me as well.
I loved it.
It was a pleasure.
I hope that we can follow up on this. I'd like to do this again.
Of course, anytime you want.
Well, okay. I'll wish you a very good evening.
Thank you so much.
And I just want to thank the members for listening and for your support. And by the way, if people want to follow Exopolitics Portugal, is there a Facebook page, web page? Where could they go to learn about? Is there anything like that happening?
There's a website, which is exopolitica.pt or exopoliticsportugal.org.
Bring your Google Translator.
We're also in Facebook, but we're not much of a social media. We are present there, but we don't put content there.
That's right.
We like more of the back office and not much of the front office.
Right.
And we are even the website. We are not a news-related ufology website. It's
Okay.
not. It's more of a organization, institution stuff.
Very good. All right, sir. Well, thanks so very much, Francisco. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.